Have you ever heard a story so shocking it makes you question everything you thought you knew about family? This is one of those stories, raw, emotional, and unforgettable. To respect their privacy, I've changed their names and locations, but every emotion you're about to hear is real. So lean in, listen closely, and follow along as this powerful journey unfolds. And if you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, make sure to do so now so you won't miss our latest stories. Don't forget to like the video and leave a comment saying, "I'm listening," so we can stay connected and experience these journeys together. On a quiet April morning in 2023, the spring sun was spilling through the lace curtains of a modest brick house at 425 Main Street in Little Rock, Arkansas. Inside, Martha Johnson, a 68-year-old widow and retired nurse, moved slowly around her living room, adjusting cushions and straightening picture frames. She had been up since dawn, tying a silver ribbon around a box, a wedding gift of $1,000 she had saved from her pension and the small inheritance her late husband left. The box sat on the coffee table next to a bouquet of fresh tulips she had bought the day before, imagining how Emily would smile when she opened it. Martha pressed the green button on her iPhone, waiting for the FaceTime call to connect. She had rehearsed her question several times. "Sweetheart, when's the big day? Should I book a bus to Dallas or maybe drive?" The screen lit up with her daughter's face. Emily Parker, 34, hair pulled into a sleek bun, wearing a cream blouse, looked almost like a stranger. The background behind her showed a living room Martha recognized immediately, the gray sectional sofa she had bought for Emily and David last year when they signed the lease on their new apartment. "Hi. Honey," Martha began, her voice warm but tentative. "I wanted to check. Have you set the wedding date yet? I've been putting some things aside." Emily didn't smile. She glanced at David, who was sitting next to her scrolling on his phone, and then looked back at the camera. Her voice was clipped, rehearsed, almost businesslike. "Mom, don't come. The wedding was yesterday. It was a small ceremony. We only invited special people." The words hit Martha like a bucket of ice water. She blinked, unsure she had heard correctly. "What do you mean? Yesterday? Special people?" she whispered, her fingers tightening around the phone until her knuckles whitened. On the screen, David chuckled at something on his screen, oblivious, and Emily turned the camera slightly so Martha caught a glimpse of champagne glasses on the coffee table. That was the same coffee table Martha had paid for when David lost his job last spring. "Emily," Martha's voice cracked, I bought a dress, a blue one, for your day. I've been saving, planning." She trailed off. Emily's expression didn't change. "It was just a quick ceremony at City Hall, Mom. Please don't make this harder." Then she ended the call. Martha stood frozen in her living room, the silence pressing in on her. The gift box sat gleaming under the morning sun. In the hallway, the blue dress she had ordered specially for the wedding hung still in its plastic cover, useless now. She reached out and touched the soft fabric through the plastic, feeling as if she were touching a dream that had dissolved overnight. Her heart thudded slowly, painfully. A tiny crack formed deep inside, the first sign that the proud, giving mother she had always been was beginning to see a different truth, one she had never wanted to believe. For weeks leading up to what she thought would be her daughter's wedding, Martha Johnson had been a whirlwind of quiet preparations inside her brick home on Main Street. Each morning after her coffee, she would sit at the kitchen table with a notepad and pen, calculating what she could spare from her pension. She clipped coupons from the local paper, skipped her usual Friday lunches at the diner, and even canceled her knitting club to save every possible dollar. "It's worth it," she whispered to herself as she sealed yet another envelope for a deposit. Emily deserves a beautiful start. She called her sister Linda in Chicago nearly every evening. Linda's voice would crackle through the line with excitement. "Oh, Martha, how wonderful. You'll be such a proud mother of the bride." They laughed about dresses and flowers, about how Emily would glow walking down the aisle. Sometimes Martha would look out at her small garden of tulips while listening to Linda's words, imagining her daughter's smile, her arm linked with David's. She had already booked a modest hotel room just outside Dallas for the weekend. Using a discount code she'd found online, she had put down a deposit on a small wedding cake at a bakery in Little Rock, planning to drive it down herself in a cooler. She even cleared out the guest room at home, changing sheets and fluffing pillows, expecting Emily and David might want to stay for a night after the celebration. Then, like a match striking a fuse, came the 4 words, "special people only," spoken so coldly through the screen the day before. A few hours later, Martha's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Emily. "It was just a small ceremony, Mom. Please don't be upset." No emojis. No hearts. Just a curt digital dismissal. Martha stared at it, her thumb hovering as if to reply, but nothing came. That night, unable to sleep, she opened Facebook. Her hands trembled as she scrolled. There it was, a series of radiant photographs from the wedding she had not been invited to. Emily in a shimmering white dress, the very one Martha had secretly contributed money toward when Emily said she couldn't afford it yet. David's parents, all smiles, raising champagne flutes under twinkling fairy lights. Guests Martha had never met posing with her daughter, laughing. Martha's breath caught. She felt like a trespasser, peeking through a window into a party she had helped fund but been banned from. The comments under the photos were filled with congratulations, little heart emojis. "You both look amazing." Her sister Linda had texted earlier that day, still believing Martha would be there. "Did you get to see the dress in person? I can't wait for pictures." Now each message felt like a blade twisting gently. She closed the app and sat in the darkened living room, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator. Her eyes drifted to the blue dress still hanging in the hallway, to the unopened box of cake samples on the counter. She had planned so much, imagined so much, and yet she was absent from her own daughter's most important day. Inside her, something began to crumble. The sturdy hope she had built with lists, deposits, and daydreams turned to ash. For the first time, she wondered if she was no longer a mother but a stranger orbiting her daughter's new life. A stranger who had paid the bills but was not welcome at the table. A week passed after the wedding that wasn't for her. The blue dress still hung untouched in the hallway, and the gift box sat on the coffee table, collecting a thin layer of dust. Martha moved around her kitchen in slow, deliberate motions, making herself a simple lunch, tomato soup from a can and half a grilled cheese. A far cry from the celebratory meals she had once planned for Emily and David. The phone sat silent on the counter, but she felt sure it would ring eventually. It was late afternoon when it finally did. The familiar ringtone sliced through the quiet. She wiped her hands on a towel, picked it up, and saw Emily's name flashing. For a heartbeat, she thought her daughter might be calling to apologize. She swiped to answer. "Mom?" Emily's voice was thin, shaky, like paper about to tear. "Mom, the rent's overdue. The landlord says he'll start eviction proceedings if we don't pay by Friday. Can you help us one last time?" Martha closed her eyes. In that pause, memories cascaded. Rushing to the bank to wire emergency funds when David lost his job. Skipping her own dental appointment to cover Emily's car repairs. Quietly eating oatmeal for dinner 3 nights a week so she could send more. Her hands gripped the edge of the counter. When she finally spoke, her voice surprised even her. It was calm, but edged like a blade. "Emily," she said slowly, "didn't you tell me last week that only special people were invited to your wedding? I guess I'm not special enough for you anymore." There was a dead silence on the line. Martha could hear the faint hum of traffic through the phone, a muffled voice in the background. Then David's voice broke in, louder, defensive. "Mrs. Johnson, please don't make this harder on Emily. I'm looking for work, but it's been tough." Martha cut him off, her fingers trembling, but her words steady. "David, I have made it easier for you both for years. I have paid your rent, your bills, even your furniture. I missed my own sister's anniversary to send you money, and yet you married my daughter without inviting me." "Mom." Emily's voice cracked, but she didn't argue. Martha took a deep breath. "I'm sorry you're in trouble, but this time, I can't fix it for you." She pressed the red button and ended the call. The kitchen went quiet again, except for the faint tick of the clock above the stove. She stood there for a long moment, phone still in her hand, her heart pounding not from guilt, but from something new. A hard, trembling clarity. For the first time in years, she realized, the one whose hands were shaking wasn't her. She set the phone down, straightened her shoulders, and went back to her soup. It tasted different now. not bitter but almost warm with resolve. This calmness, this unshakable stillness, felt like the first true step toward a freedom she had never allowed herself to imagine. That evening, the little house on Main Street was silent except for the faint ticking of the kitchen clock. Outside, April rain drizzled against the windows, blurring the streetlights. Martha sat alone at her oak dining table, the same table where she had once served Emily birthday cakes and Thomas Sunday roasts. In front of her lay a worn spiral notebook, its cover bent at the corners, and a calculator with fading buttons. She reached for a pen, her hands trembling slightly, and began to add up the years. "Let's see," she murmured to herself, flipping through the pages. She had recorded every transfer, every loan disguised as a gift. 4 years, she whispered, tapping the calculator. Rent, utilities, furniture. Her neat handwriting blurred as she ran the numbers. By the time she hit the total, the screen glowed 25,280. She stared at the figure. It represented her pension checks, the small savings her late husband Thomas had left, money she had promised herself she would use for her retirement or a trip back to Maine to see the ocean. Instead, it had gone to Emily and David. A sofa, a car repair, a deposit on their apartment, grocery store gift cards slipped into envelopes at Christmas. She had told herself each time, "They'll remember this. They'll know I love them." Her eyes drifted to the framed photo on the wall. Thomas in his nurse's uniform next to her and hers, both smiling outside the hospital. "Tom," she said softly, her voice catching. "I thought if I gave her everything, she'd feel safe, she'd feel loved. I thought I was doing what you would want." She set the pen down and covered her face with her hands. At first, the tears came hot and fast, sliding between her fingers. But it wasn't sorrow that shook her. It was anger, deep and raw, at herself and at the years she had let slip by in quiet sacrifice. She wept for the nights she had eaten crackers instead of dinner to make a bank transfer. She wept for the birthday she had spent alone because Emily couldn't get away. She wept for every time her love had been mistaken for duty. When she finally looked up, the rain had stopped. Dawn was beginning to pale the sky, a faint silver line through the curtains. Martha rose slowly, as if her body were heavier but her heart strangely lighter. She went into the bathroom, flicked on the harsh light, and stared into the mirror. The woman who looked back was the same. Gray hair pulled into a loose bun, faint lines around her mouth. But there was something new in her eyes. They were still tired, but no longer pleading. A steel edge had crept in, like the first frost of autumn. "Enough," she whispered to her reflection. "I'm done buying love. From now on, I take care of me." She wiped her cheeks, smoothed her hair, and left the bathroom. In the kitchen, the notebook still lay open with its accusatory numbers. She closed it gently as if closing a chapter. For the first time in years, Martha felt the stirrings of a woman who belonged to herself. The next morning, sunlight streamed across Martha Johnson's kitchen table, falling on a pile of receipts, bank statements, and a yellow legal pad. She had been up since dawn, hair tied back in a loose bun, a half-empty mug of coffee at her elbow. The calculator clicked under her fingers, each tap echoing like a gavel striking. "Rent, 700 times 48 months," she muttered, punching in the numbers. The screen glowed back at her, 33,600. She wrote it down, then moved to the next line. Groceries, about 180 a week for 4 years. 9,000. She kept going. Gifts, 4,000. Emergency medical bills, 1,500. Car loan payments she had quietly covered for David, 3,000. Air conditioner repair last summer, 800. Furniture and household items, 2,400. When she added it up, the total stared back at her in harsh black ink. Over $50,000. It wasn't just a sum. It was her entire life safety net. The savings she and Thomas had built so carefully for their later years had evaporated into someone else's life. She leaned back in her chair, the pen still in her hand, and whispered, $50,000. For what? Her eyes drifted to the family photo on the sideboard. Emily at 16 with braces, Thomas with his arm around them both. Back then, she had believed in a simple formula: give love, give support, and it would come back multiplied. Now, staring at the columns of figures, she saw it differently. Every dollar she had thought was an investment in family happiness had been, in truth, a payment for being tolerated. The phone rang, breaking her reverie. The sound was sharp, insistent. She looked at the screen. Emily. She didn't move. It rang until it went silent. A moment later it rang again, David's number this time. Then back to Emily. She sipped her coffee slowly, letting the calls roll to voicemail. In the past, she would have lunged for the phone, heart hammering, ready to solve whatever emergency they had invented this time. Today, she simply sat, watching the steam rise from her mug. The coffee tasted slightly bitter but comforting. For the first time, she didn't feel like a lifeline being tugged. She felt like a person sitting in her own kitchen, free to decide. She set the mug down, smoothed the pages of her notebook, and closed it. The silence in the house felt different. Not empty, but solid, like a wall she could lean against. Out the window, a cardinal landed on the bird feeder Thomas had built years ago. Its bright red feathers flashed against the pale sky. Martha drew a long, steady breath. The phone buzzed again on the counter. She didn't even glance at it this time. Instead, she reached for the newspaper she hadn't read in weeks and opened it. In the hush of her little kitchen, she realized she was tasting something new. The first small sip of freedom. Part 6. The decision at the bank, that afternoon. The April sun hung low over Little Rock, casting long, golden stripes across the quiet neighborhood streets. Martha Johnson slipped her worn leather purse over her shoulder and took one last look around her living room. The faded floral sofa, the photo of Thomas on the mantel, the stillness of a house that had once been lively. She grabbed her car keys. The small Ford Focus she'd been driving since 2009 sat waiting in the driveway, its blue paint dulled by years of sun. She slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and for a moment just sat there, hands gripping the wheel. This is it, she thought. No more transfers, no more late-night panic calls, no more sacrificing myself to keep them afloat. As she drove downtown, she caught glimpses of the city she had known for decades. The diner where she and Thomas had eaten pancakes on Saturdays, the park where Emily had learned to ride her bike. The memories felt like photographs left too long in the sun, faded, but still painful. She remembered Emily at 6 years old, running to her with scraped knees, crying, "Mommy, you're the best." Martha had scooped her up and whispered, "I'll always be here." When had that little girl become a grown woman who saw her mother as nothing more than a bank account? The Wells Fargo branch stood at the corner of Main and Capitol Avenue, its brick facade glowing warm in the late afternoon light. Martha parked and took a deep breath before walking in. The lobby smelled faintly of polished wood and paper. The familiar buzz of printers and low murmur of customers filled the air. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Johnson," called Harold, the teller she had seen nearly every month for the last 4 years. A man in his early 50s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, Harold had processed dozens of her transfers without question. He stepped out from behind the counter when he saw her expression. "Everything all right?" Martha placed her purse on the counter, smoothing the strap with deliberate care. "Harold," she said quietly but firmly, "I'm here to cancel all recurring transfers to Emily Parker and David Parker. Effective immediately." He hesitated, glancing at her over the top of his glasses. "Are you sure about this? It's a big change." She met his eyes, and for the first time in years her voice didn't tremble. "No one is forcing me. I'm just done forcing myself." She let out a small, almost surprised laugh. "I need to protect what's left of my account, and of me." Harold nodded slowly, respecting the finality in her tone. "All right, Mrs. Johnson. We'll stop the transfers and put additional security on your account. Give me just a moment." He disappeared behind a glass door to print out the cancellation forms. As she signed each page, Martha felt a strange lightness in her chest, as if each signature peeled away a layer of weight she hadn't realized she was carrying. When Harold handed her the final confirmation, she folded it neatly into her purse like a talisman. Walking out into the late afternoon air, she noticed the sky had turned a soft pink. The breeze carried the scent of blooming dogwoods from the park across the street. She paused on the sidewalk, closing her eyes and lifting her face to the wind. The bank door clicked shut behind her, but she didn't look back. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like someone's safety net or last resort. She felt like a woman standing on her own 2 feet. The thought came to her unbidden, clear as church bells. I'm free. As she slid back into the driver's seat of her old Ford, she exhaled slowly. I'm done, she whispered aloud. The words sounded solid in the small car. She turned the key and pulled away from the curb, lighter than she had felt in decades, as though she had just set down a heavy stone she'd been carrying far too long. Late that Friday afternoon, the sun was beginning to sink behind the rooftops of Main Street when Martha's old Ford Focus turned into her driveway at 425. The azaleas Thomas had planted years ago were blooming along the porch, their pink petals catching the light. But what caught her breath were the 2 cars parked crookedly at the curb. Emily's silver Toyota Corolla she recognized instantly, and an unfamiliar black SUV with tinted windows idling quietly. Her heart thudded as she pulled in behind them. Through the living room window, she could see movement. David bent over her desk, flipping through papers like a man searching for loose change. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel. My desk. My papers. She stepped out of the car, squaring her shoulders, the gravel crunching under her shoes. What on earth? She whispered to herself. As she climbed the porch steps, the screen door creaked open. Inside, Emily spun around, her eyes wide, her phone still in her hand. Mom! Emily's voice was high, a little too bright. We were just... She glanced at David, who straightened up, holding a manila folder, and at the tall man in a navy suit standing near the sofa. This is Mr. Anderson, she said quickly, our family attorney. He's here to, evaluate how you're doing. Martha's gaze moved from one face to the next. Evaluate? She repeated, her voice low but steady. In my own house? David stepped forward, palms out like a referee. Mom, please don't get upset. You cut off the money, you won't answer calls. We're worried about you. We just thought maybe... Emily reached for her mother's hand, putting on a tremulous smile. You're like a second mother to me, you know that. We're only trying to help you. For a moment, Martha felt the old reflex, the urge to soothe, to explain, to believe the best. But something in the scene snapped that instinct in two. The papers scattered on her desk, the stranger in a suit in her living room, the rehearsed tone in David's voice. This isn't help, she realized. This is a takeover. She pulled her hand back gently but firmly. Emily, she said, looking straight into her daughter's eyes. If you wanted to help me, you'd call before barging in. You'd respect my home. You wouldn't bring a lawyer to tell me I'm losing my mind. Mr. Anderson cleared his throat. Mrs. Johnson, your children are concerned about your capacity to manage... Stop right there, Martha interrupted, her voice suddenly sharp as broken glass. This is my house. These are my papers. You have no right to evaluate anything without my consent. David's jaw tightened. We're just trying to make sure you're okay, Mom. I'm more okay than I've been in years, she replied. The air in the room shifted. Emily's practiced expression faltered. Mr. Anderson shifted his weight. Martha realized she wasn't shaking. She was calm. In that quiet living room with the late sun streaming through the curtains, the truth settled on her like a heavy coat she was finally shrugging off. They had moved from pleading for money to plotting for control. She had caught them in the act, and this time, she wouldn't back down. The room had gone strangely still, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. The late afternoon sun streamed through the lace curtains, casting long golden stripes across the carpet. Martha stood in the center of her own living room, feet planted firmly on the rug she had chosen with Thomas 20 years ago. Emily sat stiffly on the edge of the sofa, her hands twisting in her lap, eyes glistening. David loomed by the window, arms crossed, while Mr. Anderson, the attorney in the navy suit, held a folder against his chest like a shield. Martha's pulse was steady. She could feel the weight of her own breath, hear it moving in and out. When she finally spoke, her voice came out clear and hard as hammered steel. I'm not confused, she said, looking from one face to another. I'm more clear-headed than I've been in years. Mr. Anderson cleared his throat and stepped forward, his polished shoes sinking into the carpet. "Mrs. Johnson," he began, adopting the tone of a teacher with a slow student, "your children have the right to intervene when they see troubling behavior." Martha cut him off with a sharp laugh, dry and brittle. "Troubling? You mean troubling because I decided to keep my own money? That's what worries you?" Emily let out a strangled sob. "Mom, please don't do this," she whispered. "We're just trying to help. We love you." David's mask slipped. His voice rose, sharp and impatient. "It doesn't matter, Mom. Everything you have is going to be ours anyway, sooner or later." The words hung in the air like smoke. For Martha, it was as if the floor had shifted, and suddenly she was seeing everything clearly. Not her children, but two strangers who had already imagined her gone. A flicker of pain crossed her face, but it was gone as quickly as it came. Mr. Anderson, perhaps sensing the shift, opened his folder and held out a stack of papers. "This is just a standard power of attorney agreement," he said smoothly. "It will make things easier for everyone." Martha didn't even glance at the papers. She reached out, took the folder, and with a decisive motion dropped it straight into the trash can beside her desk. The thud of paper hitting metal echoed through the room. "Get out of my house," she said, her voice calm but ringing like a bell. Emily's eyes widened. "Mother, you can't. Who says I can't?" Martha's tone cut through the air like a knife. She straightened her back, feeling the strength in her spine. "This is my home, my life, and my decision. I will not sign anything. I will not be bullied in my own living room." David muttered something under his breath and stepped toward the door. Emily looked at her mother one last time, tears streaming down her cheeks, but Martha held her gaze without flinching. For the first time in years, she felt power flowing back into her hands, steady and warm. Outside, a car door slammed. The sound made Martha's shoulders drop, the tension draining out. She stood in the quiet house, heart pounding, and realized she wasn't afraid anymore. She had drawn a line, and for the first time, no one had stepped over it. The black SUV's engine growled as it pulled away from the curb. David slammed the door with a force that rattled the windows. Through the glass, Martha could see his face twisted in frustration, Emily's pale and tear-streaked beside him. He rolled the window down just enough to throw one last warning into the fading light. "You'll regret this, Mom," David barked. "You're going to end up alone." Martha stood in the doorway of 425 Main Street, her hand resting on the frame, steady as a post. "I've been alone for a long time," she said evenly. "The difference is now, it's my choice." Her voice carried out onto the porch like a quiet bell. When the street fell silent again, she shut the door with a soft click. Her legs trembled, but it wasn't from fear. It felt more like the aftershocks of an earthquake. She sat down on the edge of the sofa, hands pressed flat on her knees, the adrenaline still buzzing in her veins. That night she didn't sleep. Not from regret, but from the strange energy coursing through her. She made tea, paced the hallway, even pulled out her old nursing journals just to distract herself. Each time she passed the mirror, she caught sight of her own reflection, eyes wide, jaw set, and whispered, "I did it." By dawn, she had made up her mind. She needed help, not from her children, but from someone who understood. She pulled a worn business card from the drawer. James Carter, attorney at law, specializing in elder protection. A neighbor had given it to her months ago, but she had tucked it away, embarrassed. Now she dialed the number with steady fingers. At 10 o'clock sharp, she sat in Carter's modest office downtown. The waiting room smelled of coffee and legal pads. Carter himself was a tall, sandy-haired man in his 40s, with a calm, deliberate way of speaking. He listened without interrupting as she told her story, her hands twisting the strap of her purse. "This isn't just family tension," he said finally, sliding a legal pad toward her. "This is financial exploitation of an elder. In Arkansas, it's against the law." Martha blinked at the word. "Exploitation," she repeated quietly, as if naming it made it real. "I'm going to help you protect yourself," Carter continued. "Start keeping a detailed log of every contact, every request for money. We'll change your will and power of attorney. Open a new account, update all passwords. Add security to your home. I'll draft a letter to warn them off formally." Martha nodded slowly. All right, she said. I can do that. Later that afternoon, she drove to Home Depot, the big orange sign glowing against the cloudy sky. She pushed a cart down the aisles, choosing new deadbolts, a security camera, and motion lights. The young clerk at checkout raised his eyebrows. Big project? He asked cheerfully. For my own house, Martha replied, smiling faintly. About time I invested in myself. As she loaded the boxes into the trunk of her Ford, a small thrill ran through her. Each lock, each camera felt like a brick in a wall she was building for herself. Not a wall to shut the world out, but a wall to stand behind, solid and safe. For the first time in years, every step she took felt like a step back into her own life. The next morning, the sound of drills and hammering filled the quiet house at 425 Main Street. Two young technicians from a local security company moved briskly from window to window, installing small cameras and new locks. Coils of cable lay on the hardwood floor. Martha stood in the doorway with a mug of coffee, watching them work, her cat weaving around her ankles. Her phone buzzed on the counter every few minutes. Unknown numbers flashing on the screen. She didn't need to check. She knew it was Emily trying to get through. For once, she let it ring. The steady hum of the drill was oddly comforting, like the sound of a new beginning. By early afternoon, the technicians were done. You're all set, ma'am, one of them said, showing her the app on her phone. Cameras on every entry point, motion alerts, the works. Thank you, she said, taking the phone back. Her fingers hovered over the screen where another missed call blinked. She pressed delete and slipped the phone into her purse. Outside, the April sun glowed warm. She looked at herself reflected faintly in the car window and noticed how tired she looked, but also how different. It's time, she murmured. She drove across town to a small strip mall she hadn't visited in years. The sign above the glass door read Sunshine Hair and Nails in cheerful yellow letters. Inside, the salon smelled of shampoo and nail polish, the air filled with the hum of blow dryers and soft music. A young stylist with pink streaks in her hair looked up. Can I help you? Martha smiled shyly. It's been a long time since I did anything for myself, she said. I'd like a haircut. Maybe color and... She hesitated, glancing at her hands. A manicure? Of course, the stylist beamed. You deserve it. As she settled into the chair, a cape draped around her shoulders, Martha felt a strange mix of guilt and relief. She heard herself say quietly, I forgot that I'm worth taking care of too. Everyone forgets sometimes, the stylist replied gently, combing through Martha's gray hair. But it's never too late to remember. An hour later, with soft layers framing her face and pale pink polish on her nails, she hardly recognized herself in the mirror. She reached up to touch her hair, smiling for real this time. It's beautiful, she whispered. Thank you. On the way back to her car, she spotted a neighbor she'd only waved at in passing, Nancy from across the street, a petite woman with kind eyes. Nancy crossed over, holding a grocery bag. Martha, I heard about what's been happening, she said softly. I went through the same thing with my son. I stopped paying, and only then did he come back, really come back, to apologize. Her eyes filled with tears. It's hard, but it can work. Martha squeezed her hand. Thank you, Nancy. That gives me hope. Driving home, the sun warm on her face, she felt lighter than she had in years. For the first time in months, she wasn't bracing for the next phone call. That night, with the new locks on her doors and the cameras quietly watching over her, she slipped into bed and slept deeply. Not the sleep of exhaustion, but the sleep of someone finally at peace with her own choices. It was just after 7 in the evening when Martha settled into her small kitchen, the smell of chamomile tea rising from her mug. Outside, Main Street was winding down. The sound of a distant train, a dog barking somewhere down the block. The security cameras she had installed blinked softly on the wall monitor, but tonight the house felt strangely quiet. Her cell phone lit up on the counter. Linda, Chicago. Martha hesitated before picking up. Her older sister always had a way of seeing through her, and tonight she wasn't sure she wanted to be seen. But she swiped the screen anyway. "Hey, Lynn," she said, forcing a brightness into her voice. "Martha." Linda's tone was brisk, but not unkind. "I've been following what's going on. We need to talk." Martha wrapped her hands around the warm mug, staring at the steam. "I'm fine," she began, but Linda cut her off. "No, you're not. You've been treating Emily like a client, not a daughter, and she's been treating you like a service. You're not a mother to her anymore. You're a bank account." The words landed like stones. Martha closed her eyes. "That's not fair," she whispered. "It's the truth," Linda said quietly. "When's the last time Emily called just to say she missed you? Not for money. Not for help. Just to hear your voice?" Martha tried to think, but her mind came up blank. She heard herself murmur, "I don't know." On the other end, Linda sighed. "I've heard things, Martha. Things Emily has said. She talks about your money in the future tense. When Mom's gone, we'll fix up the house. We'll invest in a business. Not if, but when. As if you're just a temporary obstacle between them and a payout." Martha's breath caught. She pressed her palm to the cool countertop, staring at the faded linoleum pattern she and Thomas had chosen so many years ago. She could almost hear Emily's voice as a little girl in this same kitchen, laughing over cookie dough. Now she heard Linda's voice like a blade cutting through fog. "You're not just their ATM," Linda went on. "You're the hurdle standing between them and what they think they deserve." The kitchen seemed to close in on her. The ticking clock on the wall sounded louder, the hum of the refrigerator a low growl. She set her mug down with a trembling hand. 40 years, she murmured. "I raised her, I sacrificed everything. And now they're just waiting." Linda's voice softened. "I'm telling you this not to hurt you, but to wake you up. Stop pretending, Martha. Protect yourself. You've given enough." Martha sat in silence, staring at the floral curtains over the sink, her heart heavy but strangely clear. The illusion she had been clinging to, that her love would buy their love, cracked and fell away like glass. She whispered, "I understand." For a long moment, neither sister spoke. Then Linda said gently, "You're stronger than you think." Martha ended the call, setting the phone down on the table. The kitchen was still the same, the worn table, the ticking clock. But inside her, something had shifted. She wasn't just hurt now. She was awake. It was a gray Thursday morning in Little Rock, the kind where the sky looks like it's been washed in ash. Martha sat at her kitchen table, still in her robe, staring at the blinking notifications on her phone, more missed calls from unknown numbers. She had muted the ringer hours ago. The new security cameras she'd had installed were connected to a small screen on the counter. The live feed showed her front porch empty except for a potted fern swaying in the breeze. Then the doorbell rang. A clear chime that echoed through the quiet house. Martha's heart gave a small jump. She glanced at the screen. A woman in a soft blue cardigan holding 2 steaming paper cups. She recognized her vaguely, the neighbor from 2 houses down. The name clicked. Nancy Carter. Martha cracked the door. "Mrs. Carter?" "Call me Nancy," the woman said warmly, holding out a cup. "I brought coffee. I wasn't sure how you take it, but it's just black with a splash of cream." The kindness in her voice disarmed Martha. She took the cup, the heat seeping into her cold fingers. "Thank you. You didn't have to." "I know," Nancy replied, stepping in when Martha gestured. "But after what I heard the other night, the shouting, the cars in your driveway, I thought maybe you could use a friend." They sat together in the living room. The same living room where Emily and David had once sprawled on the sofa Martha bought them. The air still smelled faintly of fresh paint and the new locks Martha had installed. Nancy glanced around, taking in the framed photos on the mantel, then looked back at Martha with an expression of genuine concern. "I went through something like this," Nancy began, wrapping both hands around her coffee. "My son used the same lines, called me his second mom when he wanted money, told me we were special, that we had a bond no one else could understand. It was all part of the manipulation. When I finally cut him off, he was furious." Martha let out a short, bitter laugh. "It's like there's a handbook somewhere. How to Work Your Mother 101. Nancy chuckled too, but her eyes were sad. "Sometimes it feels that way. Love bombing, guilt trips, promises they'll pay you back. It's all the same script. Martha stared into her cup. Did you feel guilty when you stopped? Nancy nodded. For the first 3 months, yes. I couldn't sleep. I worried he'd end up on the street. But then he got a job. He started paying his own rent. And slowly, he learned to see me as a person again, not just a resource. We're actually close now, but it's different. It's real. Martha swallowed hard, her eyes glistening. I'm terrified Emily will hate me forever. She might, Nancy said softly. Or she might surprise you. But either way, you're teaching her the only lesson that leads to respect, boundaries. Martha felt something stir inside her, a small, flickering hope. She reached out and squeezed Nancy's hand. Thank you for telling me this, Nancy smiled. We mothers have to stick together. For the first time in weeks, Martha didn't feel like she was fighting alone. Sitting there in her own living room, coffee warming her palms, she sensed the weight on her chest ease a little. Perhaps, she thought, saying no wasn't an act of cruelty but of love, for herself and maybe, one day, for her daughter too. It was late on a cool Saturday afternoon when Martha guided her old Ford Focus through the iron gates of Mount Holly Cemetery in downtown Little Rock. The April sun was low, casting long shadows across the worn headstones, and a soft breeze stirred the scent of pine needles and damp earth. She had driven this route countless times over the years, but today the familiar road felt heavier, as though each turn was a confession she was finally ready to make. She parked near the old oak tree at the far edge of the cemetery, grabbed a small bundle of fresh roses from the passenger seat, and walked slowly along the gravel path. Her shoes crunched softly, and each step seemed to echo in the quiet. When she reached Thomas's grave, a simple granite marker with his name, dates, and the words, "Beloved husband and father," etched below. She knelt, brushing away a drift of fallen leaves. The roses in her hand still smelled faintly of the grocery store cooler. She laid the flowers gently on the stone, then replaced the dried bouquet she had left weeks ago. "Tom," she murmured, her fingers tracing his name. "I've lost myself." Her voice cracked as she said it. "I thought if I filled the hole you left, if I gave Emily everything, she'd be okay. She wouldn't feel the absence of her father. I believed money and sacrifice would be enough." A gust of wind swept across the hillside, stirring the leaves into a slow dance. It felt almost like a sigh. Martha closed her eyes and let the breeze wash over her. She could picture Thomas's steady hands, the way he used to stand at the kitchen sink with his sleeves rolled up, humming tunelessly. "She's become someone I don't recognize, Tom," Martha whispered. "Our little girl, the one who used to climb into your lap with her storybooks. Now she looks at me and only sees a wallet. And you," she paused, swallowing hard, "you left this money for me so I could have a dignified old age. And I spent it on them, on their rent, their car, their dreams, and they shut me out of the most important day of their lives." Her hands trembled on the cool stone, but as she spoke the words out loud, something inside her loosened. "I'm sorry, Tom. I thought I was doing right. I see now I was just trying to buy back what we both lost." She straightened, brushing the dirt from her knees, and looked at the headstone as though it were a pair of eyes meeting hers. "It ends now," she said softly but firmly. "No more draining myself to prove I'm worthy of love. No more mistaking sacrifice for family." The wind quieted, and a patch of sunlight broke through the clouds, warming her shoulders. Martha drew a deep breath, feeling the air fill her lungs, steadier than it had in weeks. "I've learned my lesson, Tom," she whispered. "I promise you, I won't lose myself again." She stood slowly, smoothing her skirt, and pressed her hand one last time to the granite. For the first time since Thomas's funeral, she felt not just grief, but a flicker of resolve. She walked back to the car with the empty flower wrapper in her hand, the gravel crunching underfoot. The cemetery was still, but inside her a quiet strength was rising, like a voice she thought she'd lost returning at last. When Martha turned onto Main Street that Tuesday afternoon, the familiar sight of her little brick house at 425 Main came into view, but so did something else. 2 cars were parked haphazardly at the curb, Emily's gray Toyota Corolla and a large black SUV she didn't recognize. From the driver's seat of her aging Ford Focus, she could see figures moving around on her front porch, gesturing, pointing toward the doorbell camera she had installed only a week earlier. Her heart thudded in her chest, but she forced herself to breathe slowly, fingers gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles whitened. Through the windshield, she saw Emily pacing, arms crossed tightly over her chest. David stood nearby with a clipboard, speaking to two strangers in business attire, a man and a woman, both flipping through folders. Every so often they glanced toward the house, nodding as David pointed out the security cameras. A surge of fear rose in Martha's throat, but instead of letting it take hold, she reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. Her fingers shook only slightly as she scrolled to James Carter, attorney. "They're here again," she said quietly when he answered, her eyes still on the porch. "This time they've brought 2 more people. I don't know who they are." James's voice on the line was calm, steady. "Stay in your car, Martha. Lock the doors. I'm calling the police right now. Remember the restraining order we filed? This is exactly why. I'll meet you there." She sat in her car watching the scene unfold through the windshield. Emily stopped pacing long enough to shade her eyes and look toward the street, as if she sensed her mother nearby. David leaned against the railing, his face arranged in an expression of practiced concern. One of the strangers took photos of the front yard, while the other scribbled notes. Martha's pulse quickened, but she stayed still. For the first time in months, she felt a strange steadiness in her chest, a decision not to run, not to plead. Within minutes, the wail of a siren echoed down Main Street. A Little Rock police cruiser pulled up, lights flashing. Emily immediately raised her arms, shouting something Martha couldn't make out. David began gesturing animatedly at the officers, his voice carrying a rehearsed urgency. The 2 strangers stepped back, suddenly wary. James Carter's silver sedan arrived seconds later. He strode over to the officers, briefcase in hand, showing papers. One of the police approached Martha's car window, tapping gently. She rolled it down a few inches. "Ma'am," the officer said kindly, "it's safe for you to step out now. The individuals on your porch are being asked to leave." Martha pushed the door open slowly, her feet crunching on the gravel. Emily's voice rang out over the yard, high-pitched and trembling. "Mother, you can't call the police on your own daughter." Her eyes were red, but the words landed more like accusation than plea. Martha squared her shoulders. Her voice was low but steady, carrying across the yard. "Family doesn't threaten to have their mother declared incompetent," she said. "Family doesn't break into her home or turn her into an ATM." The officer's eyes flicked between them, but Emily said nothing more. David muttered something under his breath, tugging at Emily's arm. The 2 strangers closed their folders and drifted toward the SUV. For a moment, the yard fell silent, except for the faint hum of the police cruiser. Martha felt the April breeze tug at her hair. She realized her hands weren't shaking anymore. She had crossed a line she couldn't uncross, but also one she no longer wanted to. The officer nodded to her. "They'll be leaving now, ma'am. If they return, call us immediately. Your attorney has already provided documentation." Emily's face crumpled, but she didn't step closer. David led her back to the Corolla without a word. As the cars pulled away one by one, Martha stood at the edge of her lawn watching them go. She wasn't triumphant, just clear, almost peaceful. She turned back to James, who was tucking papers back into his briefcase. "You handled that perfectly," he said quietly. "I just told the truth," Martha replied. She glanced at her house, at the front porch she'd once imagined Emily bringing grandchildren to. "Family," she murmured to herself, "shouldn't feel like this." For the first time, she felt she had defined the word, not by blood, but by boundaries. And she had done it with action, not tears. The shouting started before the car doors even closed. David's voice, sharp and rising, cut through the spring air like a blade. "You have to pay us back, Martha," he barked from the edge of the lawn, waving a crumpled stack of papers as though it were a weapon. "You co-signed the loan. You're on the hook for this, and you know it." Martha stood on her porch, hands gripping the wooden railing. For years she had flinched at that tone. An angry voice was enough to make her reach for her checkbook. But not today. Beside her, James Carter adjusted his tie, his briefcase already open on the patio table, documents neatly arranged. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Mr. Parker," Carter said evenly, stepping forward so that his polished shoes touched the edge of the grass. "Any further communication about money or debts will go through my office. My client has records for every cent she voluntarily paid over the past 4 years. You would be well advised to consult an attorney before making demands." David's face flushed crimson. He opened his mouth to argue, but the words faltered. Emily stood slightly behind him, arms crossed, eyes darting between her husband and her mother. "David," she muttered, tugging at his sleeve, "let's just go." But he shook her off and took a step closer to the porch. "You think you're smart hiring a lawyer?" He spat. "We'll see what the court says when you're dragged into it." Carter's expression didn't change. "The court has already seen the documents," he replied. "And what it sees is a 71-year-old woman who's been financially supporting 2 able-bodied adults. That's not a debt. That's generosity. You have no claim." For a moment, the yard fell silent except for the faint hiss of traffic from Main Street. Then Emily grabbed David's arm again, her voice low and tense. "Enough. This isn't working." Without another word, she turned and walked toward the Corolla. David stood glaring a moment longer, then followed, stuffing the papers back into his bag. The car doors slammed, the engine roared, and they pulled away from the curb, tires crunching over gravel. Martha stayed where she was, one hand still on the railing. She expected her knees to shake, but they didn't. Instead, she felt an odd steadiness, like the ground had shifted back under her feet. For the first time in years, she wasn't standing alone. She had a lawyer at her side, a stack of records in black and white, and even her neighbors beginning to understand. The fog of shame and confusion that had wrapped around her for so long was thinning, and the air felt almost clean. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky over Little Rock with streaks of pink and gold, Martha crossed the street carrying a dish of cornbread. Nancy had invited her for supper. Inside the cozy kitchen, the smell of roasted chicken and rosemary filled the air. Nancy's teenage daughter, Claire, set the table, asking her mother about schoolwork and laughing at a joke. No one whispered about money. No one asked for a loan. They just moved around one another easily, with small touches and real smiles. Martha watched them quietly, her hands folded in her lap. "I used to dream about evenings like this with Emily," she said softly when Nancy poured her a glass of sweet tea. "Family dinners, grandchildren, respect? Not just transactions." Nancy touched her arm gently. "Wanting that isn't wrong," she said. "But before they can give it to you, they have to learn to see you as a person. That takes boundaries. It takes time." Martha nodded, the words sinking deep. The kitchen felt warm, not just from the oven, but from the absence of tension. She sipped her tea and let herself smile, a small, tentative smile, but real. For the first time in months, she felt the faint outline of hope flicker in her chest. Not hope that Emily would suddenly change, but hope that she herself had changed enough to survive it. That night, back at 425 Main Street, she double-checked the new locks and set the alarm. Then she stood at the window for a moment, looking out at the quiet street, and thought of the dinner table across the way. Respect, boundaries. Maybe, she thought, that was what family really started with. For a few days, an eerie calm settled over 425 Main Street. Martha's new security cameras recorded the street like watchful eyes. In the evenings, she would sit in her kitchen with a mug of chamomile tea, scrolling through the footage. Emily's Corolla idling at the curb for 10 minutes, David stepping out to pace on the sidewalk, both of them glancing at the house as if measuring it. They never rang the bell, never knocked. They just hovered, like birds of prey circling a field. Carter had warned her this might happen. "Document every appearance," he had said on the phone. "Dates, times, license plates. We'll build a case for a permanent restraining order." She kept a small spiral notebook on the counter, neat columns of times and descriptions, her handwriting firm and steady. It gave her a strange sense of control. Friday morning dawned bright and breezy. Martha was watering the petunias in the front yard when the doorbell rang. The chime startled her. These days, any unexpected sound did. But she steadied herself and walked to the door. Through the peephole, she saw a young woman in a navy blazer holding a clipboard and a thick folder. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and she had that official look, polite but unsmiling. "Good morning," the woman said as Martha cracked the door. "I'm Ms. Shaw from Arkansas Adult Protective Services. We've received a report regarding your welfare and need to do a brief check." She held up an ID badge that glinted in the sunlight. Martha's stomach went cold. She opened the door a little wider but kept the chain on. "May I see your badge closely, please?" she asked. The woman handed it over without hesitation. It looked real enough. State seal, laminated photo, barcode. Emily and David had escalated again. Not satisfied with lawyers and accusations, now they had pulled in the government. "Of course," Martha said calmly, handing back the badge. "You can come in. I have nothing to hide." She led Ms. Shaw into the living room, where the morning sun slanted across the carpet. The woman flipped open her folder and began to read a prepared statement in a slow, deliberate voice. Concerns about possible self-neglect, confusion with finances, and potential exploitation. The language was formal, but the intent was clear. Someone had painted Martha as a senile old woman incapable of managing her own life. As Ms. Shaw read, Martha's eyes drifted to the typed report. The phrasing was eerily familiar. Little turns of phrase Emily used in texts, even a typo she had seen in her daughter's emails. Her heart pounded, but she forced herself to breathe evenly. She had been blindsided before. "Not this time. I understand," Martha said, cutting in gently. "But before I answer any questions, I'd like my attorney present." Ms. Shaw blinked, clearly not expecting resistance. "Ma'am, this is just a routine welfare check," she said. "If you're not hiding anything, there's no need for a lawyer." Martha met her eyes, steady and unflinching. "Routine or not, I will have my lawyer here. That's my right." She picked up her phone and dialed Carter. "James," she said when he answered, "there's a social worker in my living room. Could you come over?" Within 20 minutes, Carter arrived, briefcase in hand. He shook Ms. Shaw's hand politely but firmly. "Does your office have a court order for this visit?" he asked. "If not, my client is under no obligation to answer questions today." Ms. Shaw hesitated, her composure faltering. "We received a report from family members who are concerned," she said quietly. Carter laid a folder on the coffee table, a mirror image of hers but thicker. "These family members have a history of financial dependence on my client and are currently under review for elder financial abuse," he said. "We will provide documentation of her mental competency, financial stability, and living conditions. If you wish to follow up, please do so through my office." Silence filled the room. Ms. Shaw's shoulders dropped slightly. She closed her folder, avoiding Martha's eyes. "I'll make a note of that," she murmured. When she finally left, the door closing behind her with a soft click, Martha felt her legs tremble. She sank into her armchair, exhaling a long, shaky breath. "They really tried to make me look crazy," she whispered. Carter gave a small nod. "They're desperate, but you handled it perfectly." For the first time that morning, Martha allowed herself a small, wry smile. "I'm learning," she said. "I'm finally learning." The cameras kept rolling outside, but inside the house something had shifted. This time she wasn't a victim caught off guard. She was a woman drawing lines and holding them. The knock on the door came mid-morning, sharp and official. Martha, still in her housecoat, peeked through the security camera feed on her phone and saw a woman in a gray blazer standing stiffly on the porch. The badge clipped to her lapel read, "Arkansas Adult Protective Services." The clipboard in her arms looked heavy with papers. Martha's stomach clenched. She opened the door a crack, leaving the chain on. "Good morning," the woman said briskly. "I'm Caroline Miller. We've received a report about your welfare. I need to ask you some questions." Her tone was practiced, almost gentle but with an undercurrent of authority. Martha took a slow breath, remembering Carter's advice. "Ms. Miller," she said firmly, "I'm going to call my attorney before answering anything." Miller's eyes flicked up from her clipboard. "If you don't have anything to hide, why hesitate?" she asked, voice soft but edged with condescension. The same old line Martha had heard from Emily when she pressed about finances, the same tactic of guilt and intimidation. "I still want my lawyer," Martha repeated, gripping the doorframe. Her voice didn't shake this time. She was surprised at how steady she sounded, like someone else speaking through her. Miller sighed, shifting her weight. "We just want to make sure you're safe," she said. "I'm safe enough to wait for my attorney," Martha replied, and closed the door gently but firmly. Inside, her heart was pounding, but she felt a strange calm settle over her. She dialed Carter with quick, sure fingers. "James, she's here," she whispered. "Just like you warned. Can you come?" "I'm on my way," Carter said. "Don't answer anything. Offer her coffee if you want, but nothing more." 20 minutes later, his silver sedan pulled up. Carter strode to the door with his briefcase, his presence radiating quiet authority. Inside the living room, Miller stood by the coffee table, glancing at the family photos on the mantel as though cataloging evidence. "Good morning," Carter said, extending his hand. "I'm James Carter, attorney for Mrs. Johnson. Do you have a court order authorizing this visit?" Miller blinked, taken aback. "No," she admitted. "We received a report from family members concerned about her ability to care for herself." Carter's voice hardened. Family members who tried to coerce her into signing over her finances? Who entered her home without permission? Who excluded her from significant life events while living off her retirement savings? He opened his briefcase and slid a thick file onto the coffee table. "This is documented evidence of over $50,000 in financial support, given voluntarily, along with written attempts to seize control of her accounts. You're being used as a tool in a family dispute. I strongly suggest you read before proceeding." Miller hesitated, then lowered herself into an armchair and began leafing through the papers. As she read, the confident posture drained from her shoulders. The pages were filled with bank statements, transfers, copies of texts and emails, each one a piece of the puzzle. The story of a mother's generosity turned into exploitation. Martha watched silently from the sofa, hands folded in her lap. A week ago, she would have been trembling, trying to explain herself. Now she just sat, letting the truth speak. After several minutes, Miller looked up, her expression softer, her voice no longer rehearsed. I see. I wasn't aware of all this," she said quietly. Carter closed his briefcase. "My client is fully competent. She has her finances in order and a strong support system. If there's no court order, we consider this visit harassment. Future contact can go through my office." Miller nodded slowly, standing. "Understood. I'll make a note of that," she murmured. When the door clicked shut behind her, the house fell into a deep, satisfying silence. Martha let out a long breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her hands were steady, her pulse slowed. "She tried to make me feel like I was the one in trouble," she said softly. Carter smiled faintly. "And you didn't let her. That's the difference." For the first time in months, Martha felt the weight on her chest ease. Not gone, but lighter. She wasn't invisible. She wasn't helpless. She had drawn a line and watched it hold, and in that small sunlit living room on Main Street, she began to believe she could keep doing it. The living room at 425 Main Street was bright with late morning light, but the atmosphere felt like a courtroom. Miller sat at the edge of the armchair, her clipboard balanced on her knees. She had arrived ready to question, her tone clipped and official. Now, with Carter standing nearby and Martha sitting upright on the sofa, the power dynamic had shifted. "Mrs. Johnson," Miller began, her pen poised, "can you explain why you stopped providing financial support to your daughter and son-in-law?" Martha folded her hands, taking a deep breath. The question landed like an accusation, but she kept her voice calm. "Because," she said steadily, "I realized they were using me as a bank, not as a mother." Her words hung in the air like the sound of a gavel. Miller blinked and scribbled something. "Don't you feel a responsibility to family?" she pressed. The phrase made Martha's stomach tighten. So many years she had heard versions of it, whispered or shouted. She straightened her back. "My responsibility," she replied, her voice gaining an edge, "was to raise my child until she was grown. Emily is 34. She's married. Supporting two able-bodied adults is not a duty. It's a choice, and I've chosen to stop." Across the room, Carter stepped forward, his tone polite but cutting. Ms. Miller, do you find it normal for a 68-year-old widow to pay rent for two healthy adults in their 30s? He let the question hang, rhetorical but damning. Miller's pen hesitated above the page. She didn't answer. Martha reached for the folder on the coffee table and opened it with deliberate movements. Inside were neatly organized bank statements, tax returns, receipts for rent, utilities, and medical bills she had paid on Emily's behalf. "These are my records," she said, sliding the papers toward Miller. "My finances are stable. My house is paid off. I manage my own accounts. I drive myself to appointments. I attend church, volunteer at the clinic, have friends who check on me. I'm not the person described in that report." Carter added another document to the pile, a sealed envelope stamped with the name of a local medical center. "My client underwent a full mental health evaluation last month," he said. "The results are exemplary. No cognitive impairment, no sign of self-neglect. She is, in fact, one of the most organized clients I've had." Miller picked up the papers one by one, her brows knitting as she read. The language of her report, phrases like possible confusion and risk of exploitation, looked hollow next to hard evidence. The confidence she had walked in with seemed to drain away. Finally, she closed the folder with a soft thud. I don't see any grounds for intervention," she admitted quietly. "There are no signs of neglect or incapacity. I'll recommend closing the case." Martha exhaled, feeling the tension flow out of her shoulders. "Thank you," she said simply. Carter gave a small, satisfied nod. "We appreciate your professionalism," he said, though his tone made clear the damage the false report had caused. Miller rose from the chair, her posture now tentative instead of authoritative. "I apologize for the inconvenience," she murmured. "Sometimes family reports can be misleading." "They can be more than misleading," Martha replied, her voice still calm but firm. "They can be harmful." For a moment their eyes met, Miller's full of reluctant understanding, Martha's steady with hard-won resolve. Then Miller slipped out the door, leaving behind the smell of fresh paper and a silence that felt different. Not oppressive, but victorious. Martha sat back on the sofa, looking at the sunlight pooling on the carpet. She wasn't just defending herself anymore. She was rewriting the story others had tried to tell about her, and as the door clicked shut, she felt a quiet surge of dignity. She had turned the investigation on its head, and for once, she wasn't the one on trial. When the front door finally clicked shut behind Miller, the house seemed to exhale. The ticking of the kitchen clock was the only sound. Martha sat at the dining table, her palms flat against the wood, feeling its grain under her fingertips. She had survived another ambush, but Carter's face was grave as he packed up his briefcase. "They're not done, Martha," he warned, glancing at her over his glasses. "I wouldn't be surprised if the next move is to petition the court for guardianship or to challenge your competency. They're running out of options." The words sent a shiver down her spine. She pictured Emily, the little girl who once braided her hair in the kitchen, now sitting in a lawyer's office plotting to take her freedom. "They could actually do that?" she asked quietly. Carter snapped the briefcase shut. "They can try," he said. "But you're ready. We have medical evaluations, bank records, witnesses. We'll make it clear to any judge that this is about money, not concern." His calm voice steadied her. She nodded slowly. "Thank you," she murmured. That evening, the sky over Little Rock glowed orange as the sun set. Martha poured herself a cup of tea and stared out the window at her quiet street. Her phone lay on the counter. She picked it up, hesitated, then scrolled to Linda's name. She needed to hear her sister's voice. "Linda?" she said when the call connected. "I have to tell you what happened today." She recounted everything. The social worker at the door, Carter arriving, the file of evidence, Miller's expression as she read the truth. Her voice shook once or twice, but mostly it was steady, almost clinical, as though she were describing someone else's life. On the other end of the line, Linda's sigh crackled through the speaker. "Martha, do you see it now?" she said bluntly. "They're willing to tear this family apart for money, hiring lawyers, dragging your name through mud, even risking legal trouble themselves, just to claw back access to your accounts. The words were like cold water. Martha closed her eyes, gripping the phone. "I keep wondering if I'm overreacting," she whispered. "If I'm making them out to be worse than they are." "You're not," Linda said firmly. "They're proving it themselves. Every stunt they pull, every false report, every threat, it's them telling you who they are. You just have to believe them." For a long moment, neither sister spoke. Martha listened to the faint sounds of Linda's kitchen in Chicago, the clatter of a spoon, the hum of the refrigerator. Ordinary life, stable life. Finally, Martha said softly, "It hurts, knowing my own child values my money more than my health. But at the same time," she paused, searching for the right words, "it's freeing. I don't have to pretend anymore. I don't have to buy affection. I can stop feeling guilty." "That's the first step," Linda replied. "Stop feeling guilty for saying no. They're adults. They can stand on their own feet. Let them." Martha felt something shift inside her, like a door closing. She sat a little straighter. "You're right," she said. "They've shown me exactly what I needed to see." After she hung up, she sat for a while in the dim light of the kitchen, the tea gone cold beside her. There was no mistaking the grief, but it no longer owned her. She felt a strange mix of sadness and resolve. Emily and David's tactics had stripped away the last illusions, but they had also stripped away her shame. Martha rose, washed her cup, and set it on the rack. In the quiet house, she felt the faint stirrings of something new, like a soldier after battle, battered but clear-eyed, ready to fight on her own terms. 3 weeks later, the Pulaski County Courthouse in Little Rock loomed before Martha like a stone fortress. Its neoclassical columns cast long shadows across the marble steps, and the spring wind carried the smell of wet pavement. Martha stood at the base of the stairs in a black suit she had pressed herself the night before. She smoothed the lapels with steady fingers. For years, she had walked into banks and sent wire transfers to her daughter with shaking hands. Today, those same hands were still, her back straight. In the courthouse window, she caught her own reflection, gray hair pinned neatly, chin lifted, and for the first time she saw not a victim, but a woman walking to defend her dignity. Carter met her at the entrance, a leather briefcase in one hand. "Remember," he said gently, "the burden is on them. We just have to show you're competent, nothing more. Let them overplay their hand." "I'm ready," Martha replied. Her voice surprised even herself. It was calm, almost low and resonant, like someone reading a verdict. Inside the hallway, the air smelled of old paper and coffee. Benches lined the walls and people whispered while waiting for their cases. At the far end, Emily sat next to David, flipping nervously through a sheaf of papers. Emily's hair was styled, her makeup carefully smudged as if for a tragic scene. David's face was set in a hard line, his arms crossed, his eyes darting like a man closing a deal. Neither of them looked at Martha when she walked past. She could feel their avoidance like a chill. The courtroom itself was paneled in dark wood. A brass clock ticked above the judge's bench. As everyone rose, the judge entered. Emily clasped a tissue in her hand as if on cue. Their attorney launched into an opening statement, describing Martha as a once vibrant mother, now showing signs of paranoia, risking her own welfare. The words hung in the air like a smear of paint. Emily dabbed at her eyes and spoke in a trembling voice about her second mother slipping away, about her deep concern for Mom's safety. It was a performance fit for a stage, and for a moment, Martha almost admired the craft of it. But when Carter stood, the mood shifted. "Mrs. Parker," he asked, looking directly at Emily, "when was the last time you called your mother without asking for money?" The courtroom went silent. Emily blinked, opened her mouth, closed it again. "And can you explain this text?" He held up a printed screenshot. "Where you told friends only special people were invited to your wedding. Was your mother not special?" Emily's face flushed. He turned to David. "How many times in the past 2 years did you visit your mother-in-law without requesting financial assistance?" David fumbled with his tie and muttered, "I don't recall." Then came Martha's witnesses. The neighborhood pharmacist testified how Martha still drove herself and managed her prescriptions with precision. The locksmith described how she'd hired him to install cameras and locks, explaining clearly her reasons. Her physician took the stand and spoke firmly. "I've examined Mrs. Johnson, She is in excellent mental health for her age, no cognitive impairment whatsoever. Martha sat very still at the table, hands clasped in her lap. With each testimony, she felt another brick slide out of the wall her daughter had built around her. She could almost hear Thomas's voice in her ear. "Stand tall, Martha. You're stronger than you know." When it was her turn to speak, she rose and faced the judge. "Your Honor," she said, her voice trembling only once. "I raised my daughter with love and gave more than I had to give." But saying no to adults is not a sign of incompetence. It's a sign of survival. Carter's closing words echoed in the wooden chamber. "This case is not about paranoia. It is about power and money. My client has every right to control her life, her home, and her savings." As the judge nodded and shuffled papers, Martha squeezed Carter's arm. She didn't know the verdict yet, but she knew something deeper. She had stood up, in public, without flinching. She had faced her accusers and answered with facts instead of fear. In that moment, she felt the quiet, hard-earned certainty of a woman reclaiming her life. The courtroom went quiet as the judge shuffled the papers on his desk. A heavy pause filled the air before he looked up over his glasses. "Mrs. Johnson," he said clearly, "there is no evidence of incompetence. You are fully capable of managing your own affairs. Petition dismissed." The sound of his gavel echoed like a door slamming shut on years of manipulation. Emily's shoulders sagged. David stared at the floor, and for a brief second Martha almost felt pity. Almost. She rose slowly, thanked the judge, and walked out with Carter at her side, the bright spring sunlight spilling over the courthouse steps like a blessing. Outside, the world seemed louder, the air fresher. Cars rolled by on Markham Street. A group of children chased each other near the park, and Martha felt herself breathe fully for the first time in years. "You did it," Carter said quietly. "No," she answered. "We did it." As they parted, she stood alone on the sidewalk, clutching her bag but feeling weightless. She wasn't just free legally, she was free emotionally. The invisible chains of guilt and duty had fallen away. Back at 425 Main Street, she opened her front door to the scent of coffee Nancy had left for her and the reassuring blink of the security camera light. She sat at her kitchen table, the same spot where she had once cried over bank statements and unanswered calls, and wrote in her notebook, "Today I reclaimed my life." She knew Emily might never apologize, might never understand, but she also knew she could not live as an endless resource. She had drawn a boundary and defended it. In that boundary, she found a new kind of love, self-respect. This entire journey, from the shocking FaceTime call to the quiet strength of the courtroom, shows how years of sacrifice do not obligate a parent to surrender their dignity. It is a story about courage, boundaries, and the possibility of healing even after betrayal. For anyone watching or reading who has felt used or unseen, remember, saying no can be the first step toward being whole again. If this story moved you, please like the video, share it with friends, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss our next stories. Leave a comment saying, "I'm listening," to let us know you're here, and to keep this community of support alive. Thank you for being part of this journey, and see you in the next video.